as a young man living in Jamaica, most of the people who I grew up with had left. The older people had left to come to England to serve, if you like, the mother country, because Britain advertised for labour after the Second World War to help to rebuild this country, and a lot of people from the colonies, of which Jamaica was one, responded, and they came.
Part of the whole process of migration is about work, and while many people worked on buses, factories and hospitals and so on, quite a few people tried to start their own business, and invariably those businesses were started in a very small scale. And more often than not, it was started in their front room.
I mean, you've arrived here from a different country. The first thing you want is somewhere to live. You need somewhere to work. If you have children, you need somewhere for them to go to school.
On this occasion, we see a tailor sitting in his front room with all the paraphernalia of his trade strewn around him. I particularly like the photograph because it has you know, the hallmark of a front room, the reflection in the dressing room table, the candlewick bedspread, which was a must for most Jamaicans at the time as well, and other bits and pieces, yeah.
The photographs that I take are, as well as a document, by that I mean documenting the process of migration and settlement, they're also hopefully serving a useful purpose in terms of documenting, of presenting or preserving a piece of material. And the importance of it is also borne out when you meet someone in the street and they'll say to you, without the photographs you have taken, I wouldn't be able to communicate with my children about the past I lived in Handsworth. Here we are in Austin Road Church, the church where my grandmother came to. In fact, I think one of her only defining act was to have broken away from George Street Church as part of the congregation which ultimately brought about this church. My mother now comes to this church, and it's a church that I've been photographing for quite consistently for some time. I've chosen to photograph one church so as to get very close to the congregation for them to trust me, and it was never really about the amount of churches that I photographed, but my relationship with the photograph. Again, this is an attempt to photograph to record rather different aspects of people's settling in a new environment. And the photograph that we're showing taken in this church is a baptism which took place in the pool, which is baptismal pool, which is under my feet where we're standing right now. The way migration work, it's like it's a continuous thing, and then on top of that, the people who were here before are establishing themselves with communities and families themselves, which then makes it even more complex, and then new people are coming in.
Here we are standing outside Thornhill Road Police Station. The photograph we're referring to on this occasion is one which was taken when a group of Rasta decided to complain, to demonstrate about police harassment in the area. And in the photograph we see Linvest, who was reading a letter they had all constructed for the police with regards to their feeling. What was particularly interesting about this one for me was the fact that these guys had articulated their concern in written form, as opposed to you know, other forms which would normally take place in terms of demonstrations and so on. In 1985, these streets behind me erupted in violence, really. It was the Handsworth riots of '85, and this is where I took quite a few photographs documenting the events on the day following the terrible night. Most of the buildings on this road were in flames, were destroyed, and in fact 2 people died in the post office just below me there. The changes that's been taking place since, they've rebuilt some of the buildings, put in car parks, open spaces and that sort of thing, and also changes have been made with regards to the people who are now living in the area. New people have migrated to the area, and there have been changes.
Okay, I now have an archive at Birmingham Central Library, and the whole process of the archive came about as a result of my son having an accident, a fire in the shed where I kept a lot of this material, And a friend of mine, Pete James, saw the material and suggested that I store it at Birmingham City Library. And I think, I'm not sure, I think perhaps about 2/3 of it has been archived and it's available to the public to have a look at. And again, as I said, we have a lot of people visiting and using that material.
Is that one there?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my many jobs throughout my life in Britain has been play leader. I was a play leader, and in the 80s I happened to be working pretty well where we're standing, where the play centre was. And at the time, a lot of young black kids would use the park for recreational purposes. There was very little activities laid on for them, and so they would just move around in groups. And from time to time they'd get moved on by the park police or the police in general, which brought about some dislike for people in uniforms. The boys sitting on the seesaw for me was quite symbolic at the time, because they seemed as if they were in no man's land, they were in limbo. From time to time I see one or other of them, and we have a conversation about what's happening to them, and it's quite fascinating to see. In fact, one of them told me that the photograph changed his life. He said he was up to no good prior to that, and then after he had quite a few of his photographs published in books and so on, and seeing it on television, it greatly influenced him, and it changed the way he was.
I mean, I'm just hoping that the photographs will do something, go some way rather, in terms of informing future young generation, new people who've moved in the area, and older people who have experienced those things, bringing them back together so that somehow they can, just say, well, we didn't just start today. The whole process of assimilation, of settling in, of establishing yourself in a space is a long, lengthy one. Children in the future, it is absolutely vital that they have that to reflect on how their parents established themselves here.